Chapter 1. The Hunter and the Haunted. The city air clung to Cora's skin, a suffocating blanket woven from exhaust fumes, fried onions, and the damp rot of 1,000 forgotten alleyways. Each scent was a dull note in a chaotic symphony, but one thin, sharp thread of wrongness, made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It was the scent of predator, not the mindless hunger of a city rat, but the cold, calculating scent of a wolf on the hunt. Her wolves. The rogues she'd been running from for what felt like an eternity. She pulled the thin hood of her jacket lower, the rough fabric scratching her cheek. Her stomach twisted, a hollow ache that had become a constant companion. Hunger. It was a gnawing beast, but fear was a sharper one. She kept to the shadows, her body a whisper against the grimy brick walls. Every footstep was a prayer, every flicker of movement a threat. She was a ghost in her own life, haunted by the curse she carried. The curse of being an omega, a beacon, a weakness. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the bustling marketplace. People flowed like a river around her, their laughter and chatter a world away from her silent panic. They didn't see the shadows that clung to her, didn't smell the danger that nipped at her heels. To them, she was just another piece of city detritus, thin, worn, and invisible. A bakery cart trundled past, the smell of warm bread and sweet cinnamon a punch to her gut. Her mouth watered. It had been days since she'd had a real meal. Her gaze fell on a bin behind the cart, overflowing with the day's discards. Shame warred with desperation. But survival always won. With a furtive glance around, she darted forward. Her fingers, nimble and quick, closed around a slightly crushed pastry. It was still warm. A small, pathetic victory, but a victory nonetheless. She retreated back into the shadows, the pastry a treasure clutched in her hand. She took a bite, the sweet, flaky layers melting on her tongue. And then something strange happened. A wave of calm washed over her. It was sudden, sharp, and almost painful in its intensity. For a single, breathtaking second, the gnawing hunger in her belly lessened. The crushing exhaustion that weighed on her bones lifted. It was like a cool drink of water on a scorching day, an unexplainable, profound relief. Her head snapped up, her senses on high alert. Where had that come from? She scanned the crowd, searching for the source of this impossible peace. A sea of faces blurred before her, a woman haggling over tomatoes, a child laughing on his father's shoulders, a man in a tailored suit, his back to her, standing perfectly still amidst the chaos. Nothing. There was nothing. Shaking her head, she dismissed it. A fluke. A trick of her tired mind. The moment passed, and the familiar weight of her reality settled back onto her shoulders. The rogue's scent was still there, a persistent metallic tang in the air. She had to keep moving. She finished the pastry, the brief respite it had offered already a fading memory. The city was a labyrinth, and she was its prey. As she slipped back into the flow of the crowd, a new feeling prickled at her. A sense of being watched, not by the hungry eyes of the rogues, but by something else. Something different. She risked a look over her shoulder. The man in the suit was gone. The crowd churned on, oblivious. But the feeling remained, a new and unsettling thread in the tapestry of her fear. The hunt was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, there was more than one hunter in the game. Chapter 2. The Alpha's Solitary Watch. From his perch high above the city, Reese watched the world unfold below. The penthouse was a cage of glass and steel, its minimalist luxury a stark contrast to the churning chaos of his thoughts. He was an alpha of alphas, the leader of the most powerful pack on the continent, yet he had never felt more alone. His inner wolf paced restlessly, a primal, untamed thing trapped in a gilded cage. It yearned for something. Something beyond the endless pack meetings, the suffocating traditions, the weight of a prophecy that had dictated his entire life. The voice of the moon goddess was a constant whisper in the back of his mind, a chilling reminder of his approaching 25th birthday. Find the lost line Omega, or your line ends with you. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the fine silk of his shirt whispering against his skin. His gaze drifted to an ancient, intricate map spread across a massive oak table. It depicted the werewolf territories as they had been centuries ago, a world of wild, untamed magic. His eyes lingered on a region marked in faded ink, Omega's End, the place where the last of the harmony-wielding Omegas had supposedly been wiped out by his own ancestors, a stain on his lineage, a history he was desperate to rewrite. He hated the prophecy, hated the idea of a mate chosen by fate, not by heart. He wanted more, a connection, a partner, not a political pawn, not a solution to a centuries-old curse. Suddenly, a scent hit him. It was faint, almost lost in the city's overwhelming olfactory noise, but it cut through everything else like a bolt of lightning. An Omega. But not just any Omega. This scent was different. It was imbued with a strange, compelling pull, a melody of wildflowers and rain-soaked earth laced with a thread of pure, unadulterated moonlight. His wolf gave a low, guttural growl of recognition. Mate. The word exploded in his mind, a primal, undeniable truth. He was on his feet in an instant, the carefully constructed composure of his human guise shattering. Urgency seized him, a desperate, all-consuming need to find the source of that scent. He moved with a predator's grace, shedding his suit jacket as he went. The city below was a blur of lights and movement, a concrete jungle he knew as well as the forests of his homeland. He followed the scent, a silver thread in the darkness pulling him, guiding him, leading him, down into the teeming, chaotic heart of the human world. A world he usually avoided, a world of fragile, fleeting lives. But she was there, his mate, the lost line Omega, the key to his survival. And as he descended, a cold, hard knot of fear tightened in his chest. The prophecy wasn't just about him. It was about his pack, his people. Their survival rested on his shoulders. And now, it rested on the shoulders of an Omega he had never met. An Omega who, according to all the old laws, was the weakest of their kind. He pushed the thought aside. He had to find her. He had to protect her. From the rogues that he knew hunted her kind. From the pack elders who would see her as a tool. From the world that would never understand. The scent grew stronger, a beacon in the night. It led him to a small late-night cafe, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. And there, sitting in a booth, her head bowed in exhaustion, was a woman with hair the color of spun gold and eyes that held the storm of a winter sea, his mate. And as he stood there watching her, the full, crushing weight of his destiny settled upon him. He was an alpha. She was an omega, and their worlds were about to collide. Chapter 3. A Shared Haven, Unknowing Destiny. Cora stumbled into the cafe, the warm, coffee-scented air a welcome reprieve from the city's chill. The rogue's scent had been growing stronger all night, a suffocating presence that clung to her like a second skin. It wasn't just a smell, it was an active force, draining her, pulling at the threads of her energy until she felt like she was unraveling. Her body was a leaden weight, each step a monumental effort. The world was a blurry, out-of-focus painting, her senses dulled by exhaustion and fear. She barely registered her surroundings as she made her way to what she thought was an empty booth in the corner. All she wanted was a moment. Just one moment of peace. She slid onto the worn leather seat, her body slumping with a sigh of relief. She leaned her head back, her eyes fluttering shut. And then, she felt it. A strange, unexpected comfort. A solid, warm presence beside her. Her eyes snapped open. She wasn't alone. A man sat in the booth with her, his presence so quiet, so still, she hadn't even noticed him. He was dressed in a simple dark shirt, but there was an air of power about him. A quiet, contained strength that seemed to hum just beneath his skin. He was watching her, his eyes a startling shade of amber like molten gold. Panic flared in her chest. A stranger. Too close. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the night. But she couldn't. She was trapped, pinned by the weight of her own exhaustion and the intensity of his gaze. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. But as their eyes met, something shifted. The panic in her chest didn't disappear, but it softened. The chaotic noise in her head quieted. The draining pull of the rogue's scent lessened, its sharp edges smoothed by his presence. It was him. The man from the market, the source of that impossible fleeting moment of peace. He was a werewolf. She knew it with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. But he wasn't a rogue. His scent was different, clean, powerful, like a storm gathering on the horizon, an alpha. A fresh wave of fear, colder and sharper than before, washed over her. Alphas were dangerous. They were rulers. They were everything she was not. But then his wolf screamed, a silent, soul-shattering roar that echoed in the space between them. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated recognition. Mine. And in that instant, she knew. He knew. The world tilted on its axis. The air crackled with an energy she had never felt before, a raw primal force that stripped away everything but the two of them. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was undeniable. The mate bond. It exploded between them, a supernova of light and heat. Her body, her soul, her very essence reached for him, yearned for him, recognized him as the other half of her being. His human composure, so carefully constructed, cracked. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He was fighting it, fighting this impossible, inconvenient truth. But it was too late. The bond was forged. The overwhelming fatigue, the culmination of days on the run, finally claimed her. Her head grew heavy, her eyelids impossibly so. She swayed, the world dissolving into a soft, hazy blur. And then, she was falling. Not into darkness, but into a strange, new kind of light. A light that smelled of pine and earth and thunderstorms. A light that felt like home. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep on his shoulder, her soft breath ghosting against his neck. The last thing she was aware of was the feel of his body, tense and unyielding, a solid anchor in the storm of her life. He didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen, trapped between the rigid laws of his world and the undeniable truth of his heart, his fated mate, the key to his survival. An omega. And she was asleep on his shoulder, as fragile and as powerful as the moonlight itself. Chapter 4: Shattered Silence. A groan slipped past Cora's lips as she surfaced from the deep well of sleep. Awareness returned slowly. First, a feeling of impossible warmth. Then a scent. Not the stale city air or the metallic tang of fear, but something rich and wild. Pine needles after a storm, the clean, crisp scent of a mountain forest. It was safe. She shifted, her cheek rubbing against something soft yet firm. A man's shirt. Her eyes shot open. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed through her. She was leaning against the stranger from the booth, the alpha. Mortified, she tried to scramble away, her muscles screaming in protest. A hand closed around her arm. His touch was gentle, but the strength behind it was absolute. A jolt, pure electricity, shot up her arm and straight to her core. Easy. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated right through her. Before she could answer, before she could demand he let her go, the world exploded. The cafe's glass door shattered inward, a violent spray of glittering shards. Two figures filled the doorway, their forms hulking and monstrous in the dim light. Rogues. The scent hit her like a physical blow, thick and suffocating with malice and hunger. Their eyes, glowing with a faint, predatory light, were locked on her. Found you. Cora's blood ran cold. This was it, the end of the line. But her survival instinct, honed by years on the run, was a fire that wouldn't be so easily extinguished. She moved without thinking, shoving away from the table, trying to put space between herself and the monsters. One of them lunged, a blur of motion and bared teeth. She dodged, her body twisting with a desperate agility she didn't know she possessed. She grabbed a heavy ceramic sugar dispenser from a nearby table and hurled it, catching the rogue squarely in the face with a satisfying crunch. He howled in pain and fury, but his partner was already on her, backing her into a corner. There was nowhere to run. Terror stole her breath. She braced for the inevitable, for the teeth and the claws and the darkness. And then, the alpha moved. He didn't shout. He didn't charge. He simply rose to his feet, placing himself between Cora and the attackers, and the air in the room changed. It grew heavy, thick with a pressure that made her ears pop. An invisible wave of pure, undiluted power rolled off him. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling. A silent command that slammed into the rogues with the force of a physical blow. They stopped dead. A guttural whimper escaped the first rogue. The second one dropped into a submissive crouch, its tail tucked between its legs, its eyes wide with a primal terror it couldn't comprehend. They looked at the man before them, not as a person, but as a force of nature, an apex predator they had been foolish enough to challenge. He said nothing. He didn't have to. He just looked at them. And it was enough. They turned and fled, scrambling over each other to get out of the shattered doorway and disappear back into the night. The silence they left behind was deafening, broken only by Cora's ragged breaths. The pressure in the air vanished, but a tingling echo of it remained on her skin. She stared at the man, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. He turned to her, his golden eyes searching her face for injuries. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice steady. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. He helped her to her feet, his touch gentle. "Just some advanced security training," he said, the words sounding weak and hollow even to her own ears. A lie. A blatant, impossible lie. But she was too shaken, too overwhelmed by the phantom sensation of his raw power to call him on it. He had saved her. That was the only truth that mattered in that moment. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice firm. "They'll be back. Come with me. I have a safe place." She should have said no. She should have run. Every instinct she had ever trusted screamed at her to get away from this man and the impossible power he wielded. But as she looked into his eyes, she didn't see a threat. She saw a promise of safety, a promise of an end to the running. And for the first time in a long time, she was too tired to say no. Chapter 5. A Gilded Cage. The ride up was silent. Cora stood in the corner of the elevator, a gleaming box of polished steel and mirrored walls, and tried not to look at him, or at herself. The woman reflected back was a stranger, wild-eyed, pale, her clothes rumpled and stained. Him. He looked like he belonged. His dark clothes were simple but expensive, and he stood with an easy confidence that seemed to radiate from him. He'd introduced himself as Ryan, a simple human name. Another lie. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, and Cora's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't an apartment. It was a cavern of glass. One entire wall was a window looking out over the city, the lights a glittering tapestry spread out below them. The furniture was sleek and modern. The air smelled faintly of leather and something clean and masculine that was uniquely him. "This is your safe house?" she asked. her voice barely a whisper. The place was a palace, a gilded cage. Something like that, he said, his voice noncommittal. He moved towards a small hidden bar. Drink? She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. She felt small, out of place. Suspicion was a bitter taste in her mouth. How could anyone afford a place like this, especially someone who was on the run same as her? I know you have questions, he said, turning back to her. He didn't have a drink. He was just watching her. Let me help you with that cut first. She looked down. A thin line of blood trickled from a shallow gash on her forearm, a souvenir from the shattered glass. She hadn't even felt it. He guided her to a plush sofa and returned a moment later with a first aid kit. He knelt before her, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. I'm an Omega, he said softly, his voice catching her completely off guard. He dabbed at the cut with an antiseptic wipe, his touch sending shivers across her skin. Like you. Cora stared at him, stunned. An Omega? It didn't make sense. The power she'd felt from him. That wasn't Omega power. But the words... Oh, the words were a siren's call to the lonely, frightened part of her soul. Another Omega. A kindred spirit. Someone who understood. My pack is small, he continued, his gaze focused on his task. We have to look out for each other. We've learned different ways to survive. Was that it? Was that the explanation for his strange abilities? A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. He finished cleaning the cut, his fingers brushing against hers as he applied a bandage. The contact was a lightning strike, a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy that made her gasp. The mate bond, a quiet hum until now, roared to life. It was a physical pull, a desperate yearning to be closer, to touch, to connect. Her wolf, so long dormant and suppressed, uncurled within her, purring with a deep, contented rumble. It recognized him. It trusted him. It wanted him. But her mind screamed caution. This was too easy, too good to be true. The luxurious apartment, his unexplained power, the lies. He must have felt the shift, seen the war in her eyes. He finished with the bandage, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long before he slowly, deliberately pulled his hand away. He rose to his feet, putting a careful distance between them. The air crackled with unspoken tension, with the raw magnetic pull of their bond. His control was visible in the tight line of his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders. You're safe here, Cora, he said, his voice a low, earnest promise. I swear it. She looked around the beautiful, empty room. It felt like a cage, but it was the safest cage she'd been in for years. She was a mouse, and he was a lion claiming to be a mouse right alongside her. It made no sense. But the alternative was going back out into the night, where the real monsters were waiting. Okay, she whispered, the single word feeling like a surrender. For now. Chapter 6. The First Truth. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and 1,000 unanswered questions. Cora stood before the vast wall of glass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she watched the city breathe below. It looked so peaceful from up here, a silent, glittering jewel. A world away from the desperate, shadow-filled labyrinth she knew it to be. She could feel him across the room, a warm, solid presence at her back. The bond between them was a living thing, a constant low hum beneath her skin. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a chain, tethering her to a man she didn't know and a situation she didn't understand. Enough. She turned, her resolve hardening. He was watching her, his golden eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Patience? Concern? That wasn't security training, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "And you are not an Omega. Don't lie to me again. What was that in the cafe? What are you?" He didn't look surprised. He seemed to have been waiting for this. He let out a slow breath, the sound loud in the silent room. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of a deep inner conflict. "You're right," he finally said, his voice laced with resignation. "I'm not an Omega." He took a step closer, and she held her ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I am a werewolf, Cora." The words hung in the air between them, a confirmation of what she already knew, but hearing it aloud made it terrifyingly real. Her entire life had been a flight from his kind. "And you are my mate," he added, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mate. The word was both a promise and a threat. She wanted to deny it, to scream that it was impossible, but the undeniable pull in her soul, the way her very being seemed to sigh in his presence, was a truth she couldn't escape. "So this is all a lie?" she shot back, anger a welcome shield against the fear. "Luring me here? What do you want from me?" "No!" The word was sharp, fierce. He took another step, his eyes pleading. "The only lie was to keep you from running. Can you blame me? If I had told you the truth, would you have come with me?" She flinched. He was right. She would have run. She would have taken her chances with the rogues over an unknown alpha. "My name is Reese," he said, the name sounding ancient and powerful. "And my pack is different. The power you saw, it's a part of who I am. It's what I used to protect you." He stopped just before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Everything I've done since I saw you has been to protect you." His vulnerability was a crack in his powerful facade. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the genuine fear of losing her. It was a look she had never seen on an alpha. It disarmed her, chipping away at the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. The bond between them pulsed, a warm, insistent current. It urged her to believe him, to trust him, to step closer. "Please," he whispered, his voice raw. "Don't run from me. Just give me a chance to prove that I'm not like them." He was so close now. His scent enveloped her, a heady mix of pine and storm and something that was just Reese. It was intoxicating. It felt like coming home. He lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently cupped her cheek. His touch was warm, possessive, and yet incredibly tender. Her breath hitched. Her instincts were at war, one screaming at her to flee, the other begging her to lean in. He lowered his head, his gaze never leaving hers, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was the raw, undeniable truth of the bond, a force too powerful to be ignored. It was fear and relief, anger and yearning, all crashing together in a single searing moment. It was the taste of a partial truth, and the feel of a future she could no longer run from. It was a promise, sealed in the heart of a gilded cage. A fragile, dangerous alliance had been forged. Chapter 7. Lessons in Moonlight. The past 2 days had been a strange, suspended reality. Cora wore clothes that weren't hers, a soft gray sweater and dark jeans that felt like a foreign skin. She'd eaten real food, slept in a bed that felt like a cloud, and hadn't once smelled the sharp, metallic tang of hunting rogues. This penthouse, this gilded cage, had become a sanctuary. And Reese had become her keeper, her teacher. "It's not about hiding," he explained, his voice a low, steady rhythm in the quiet of the morning. They stood in the center of the vast living room, the city waking up behind the glass walls. "It's about blending. Your scent, it's like a song. Right now, it's the only one playing. You need to learn how to make it sound like the rest of the city." He guided her through the process, his instructions surprisingly gentle. It wasn't a spell with complicated words, but a mental exercise, a visualization. "Close your eyes," he murmured. "Picture your energy, that light inside you. Now, pull it inward, wrap it around itself until it's a tight, dense star. Cloak it in shadows, in the smell of rain on pavement, of car exhaust, of 1,000 strangers walking by." Cora took a deep breath, the air thick with his scent, that distracting, alluring mix of pine and storm. She did as he said, focusing inward, imagining her Omega essence, that thing she'd always considered a curse, and tucking it away. She pictured herself as just another shadow in the city's vast alleyways. Incredible. Reese's voice was soft, laced with genuine surprise. Her eyes fluttered open. He was closer now, his golden gaze intense. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "It's gone," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "Almost completely. You're a natural, Cora. A natural." The words echoed in the quiet spaces of her heart. No one had ever called her a natural at anything except running. No one had ever looked at her Omega nature and seen talent. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in her chest. For the first time, she wondered if this part of her, this curse, could be something more. "The final test is proximity," he said, his voice dropping lower. He stepped into her space, and the air crackled. "I need to be close to see if any trace of it is leaking." He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. His nearness was a physical force, a magnetic pull that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. He stopped behind her, leaning in close, his breath warm against her neck as he inhaled. A shiver traced its way down her spine. "Perfect," he whispered, his voice a gravelly rumble that sent a tremor through her. His hand came up, fingers lightly brushing the sensitive skin of her arm. "There. You're completely cloaked. You feel that? The shift in the air around you?" She felt it. But she also felt the heat of his touch, the sudden, fierce pounding of her own heart. The mate bond, a simmering undercurrent, flared into a raging fire. Her mind was focused on the lesson, but her body was screaming for something else entirely. The student and the teacher, the alpha and the omega, the man and the woman. It was all a tangled, confusing mess of need and suspicion. She jerked back, putting space between them. I get it," she stammered, a flush creeping up her neck. He didn't press. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were dark with a hunger that mirrored the craving in her own soul. The lesson was over, but a new, far more dangerous one was just beginning. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Alley. The city felt different with him by her side. The familiar, oppressive weight of fear was gone, replaced by a strange, hyper-aware confidence. Cora walked through the crowded streets, the scent-masking technique a fragile shield around her. The constant drain on her energy, the signature of her Omega curse, was still there, a dull, persistent ache. But his presence was a balm, a buffer that kept the worst of it at bay. It was like standing in the calm eye of a hurricane. "You're doing well," Reese murmured, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Stay close." She didn't need to be told. The bond kept her tethered to him, a moth drawn to a flame. They turned down a quieter street, away from the main flow of pedestrian traffic. The towering buildings cast long, deep shadows, turning the afternoon into a premature twilight. And then she felt it. A flicker. A single hungry gaze that cut right through her carefully constructed shield. A man stepped out from a narrow alleyway, his eyes fixed on her. He was gaunt, his clothes ragged, but his scent was unmistakably wolf. A stray. Not one of the organized pack that had hunted her, but something almost worse, a desperate lone predator. "Omega," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He took a step towards her, a low snarl building in his chest. "You smell powerful. Special." Before Cora could even flinch, Reese was moving. He stepped in front of her, a solid, immovable wall. "Back off," he said, his voice deceptively calm. The stray laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Two of you? You think you can protect her, little Omega?" He lunged. What happened next was a blur of brutal, efficient motion. Reese didn't erupt with that terrifying, silent power she'd felt in the cafe. This was different. This was physical. He met the rogue's charge head-on, deflecting the attack with a precision that was breathtaking. There was a block, a twist, the sickening crack of a bone breaking. The stray howled in pain as Reese slammed him against the brick wall, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. "I said, back off," Reese growled, his voice a low, menacing vibration. He looked every bit the part he was playing, a highly skilled, dangerous Omega protecting his own. The stray, whimpering, scrambled away and disappeared back into the shadows. Reese turned back to her, his chest rising and falling heavily. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her heart still racing. But as they walked away, a strange detail snagged in her mind. A couple of human pedestrians across the street had witnessed the entire, brief confrontation. They weren't staring in shock or reaching for their phones to call the police. They were avoiding. Their eyes slid away from Reese, their pace quickening as they gave him a wide, almost fearful berth. It was an instinctual reaction, a deep-seated recognition of a predator that shouldn't be provoked. Why would they react that way to an Omega? It was a small, dissonant note in the story he was telling her, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of her suspicion. Back in the silent sanctuary of the penthouse, the adrenaline from the fight finally crashed over them. The fear, the sudden violence, it all fed the primal, untamed nature of their bond. "He didn't hurt you?" Reese asked, his voice low and possessive. He stepped close, his hands gently framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones as his golden eyes scanned her for any injury. The last of her composure crumbled. The proximity, the concern, the lingering thrill of danger. It was too much. This time, when the pull came, she didn't fight it. She leaned in. The kiss was a combustion, a fierce, desperate release of all the tension and fear that had been coiling between them. It wasn't a gentle exploration. It was a claiming. A raw, hungry acknowledgement of the unstoppable force that bound them together, a force that was far more dangerous than any rogue in an alley. Chapter 9. The Lies in the Lore. The next morning, the silence in the penthouse was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Reese was gone. He'd left before she woke, with a vague excuse about needing to check the perimeter. It felt flimsy, another piece in the puzzle of him that didn't quite fit. Left alone with her thoughts, the nagging inconsistencies of his story circled her like vultures. The way humans instinctively recoiled from him, the sheer, impossible luxury of this apartment, the lie about being an Omega. Restless, Cora found herself wandering into a room she hadn't entered before. A study. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with books, their leather spines aged and worn. In the center of the room, on a massive mahogany desk, a single volume lay open. It was bound in dark, cracked leather, its pages filled with elegant, handwritten script. A history. A book of werewolf lore. Drawn by an irresistible curiosity, she approached. Her fingers traced the gilded title on the spine. The Great Pax. A history. She began to flip through the pages, her eyes scanning passages about ancient pack laws, territorial disputes, and legendary alphas. It was a world she had only ever seen from the outside, from the perspective of the hunted. Then she found a chapter that made her blood run cold. Of dormant and extinct bloodlines. Her gaze snagged on a paragraph. The lost line Omega. The description that followed was like reading a biography of her own soul. It spoke of a rare type of Omega, one whose scent held a unique, calming resonance. An Omega with the innate ability to soothe aggression, to influence the wildest wolf, to create harmony. It described her draining curse not as a weakness, but as an empathic power so potent it was overwhelming without a bonded alpha to ground it. It was a gift, not a curse. A gift. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything she believed about herself, every ounce of self-loathing she'd carried for years, was a lie. Then her eyes fell on the next section. A prophecy. A chill, colder than any winter night, crept over her skin. It spoke of the alpha of alphas, the leader of the great mountain pack. It foretold that this alpha, upon his 25th year, must find and bond with his fated mate from the lost line. If he failed? If the bond was not completed by the dawn of his birthday, the immense, ancient magic of his lineage would turn inward and consume him. He would die. Her breath hitched. She scanned the page, her heart hammering against her ribs until she found the name. The current alpha of the great mountain pack, rapidly approaching his 25th birthday. Reese. The book slipped from her numb fingers, landing on the plush rug with a soft thud. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His power, his desperation to find her, to keep her, the way humans feared him. He wasn't just an alpha. He was the alpha, the most powerful one of all. And she wasn't just his mate. She was his cure, his lifeline, a tool to be used to save his own life. The fragile, budding trust she had so foolishly allowed to grow in her heart didn't just break. It shattered. The pain was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. He hadn't saved her out of kindness. He hadn't protected her out of affection. It was all self-preservation. The quiet hiss of the elevator door sliding open broke the suffocating silence. Reese was back. He walked into the study, a small, hopeful smile on his face. Cora, The smile died the instant he saw her. He saw her pale face, the shimmering tears of betrayal in her eyes. He saw the open book on the floor. His face went white. The carefully constructed mask of the gentle, caring Omega fell away, revealing the shocked, guilty face of a king caught in his own web of lies. Chapter 10. A Crown of Lies. The silence in the study was a physical weight, pressing down on Cora, crushing the air from her lungs. Reese stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of pale shock. The book lay between them on the floor, an open wound spilling its poisonous truths. The prophecy. Cora's voice was brittle, a shard of ice. The alpha of alphas who will die on his 25th birthday. It's you, isn't it? He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He gave a slow, defeated nod. Yes, he breathed. It's me. The single word was a confirmation that ripped through the last of her denial. The betrayal was a living thing, coiling in her gut, hot and sickening. So that's all I am to you? She whispered, the words trembling with a fury she didn't know she possessed. A cure? A key to unlock your own survival? No! He took a step into the room, his hands held up as if to ward off her words. Cora, that's not what this is. I was going to tell you everything. When? She shot back, her voice rising. After the bond was complete? After you got what you needed from me? Was any of it real? That night in the cafe? The way you look at me? Or was I just a puzzle you had to solve before your time ran out? The pain in her voice was raw, ragged. Her self-sacrificing nature, the part of her that had always felt like a burden, twisted his deception into a cruel affirmation of her deepest fear. She was not wanted, only needed. Everything else is real, he insisted, his voice cracking with a desperation that mirrored her own pain. He closed the distance between them, his golden eyes pleading. The prophecy. It just showed me the way. It led me to you. But what I feel for you, that has nothing to do with a prophecy. That's us. You have to believe me. He was so close now, his familiar scent of pine and storm a torment. She wanted to believe him. The mate bond screamed at her to believe him, to fall into his arms and let him make it all okay. But the lies were a chasm between them, too wide to cross. How could she ever trust him again? How could she know if his touch was driven by desire or by the ticking clock of his own mortality? "I don't know what to believe," she whispered, turning away from him, the sight of his face too much to bear. Just as the argument reached its breaking point, a new scent sliced through the air of the penthouse. It was sharp and floral, laced with an undercurrent of something wild and dangerous. It was arrogant. It was powerful. It was another alpha. Rhys went rigid beside her, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. His entire body transformed, the easy grace of his human guise replaced by the coiled, dangerous stillness of a predator. He turned his head towards the entrance of the apartment, his face a mask of cold fury. The soft chime of the private elevator announced the arrival of their unwanted guest. A new threat had just walked through the door. Chapter 11. The Omega's Defiance. She stood in the archway as if she owned it, a queen surveying her domain. Her hair was the color of fire, cascading over the shoulders of a perfectly tailored dress. Her eyes, a startling, vivid green, swept the room with an air of bored authority before landing on Cora, and dismissing her in the same instant. "Rhys," she said, her voice like silk wrapped around a blade. She glided towards him, her movements fluid and possessive. "I see you've found a stray. Honestly, I was starting to worry." She placed a manicured hand on his arm, her touch a clear act of ownership. Her gaze flicked back to Cora, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "You can't possibly be entertaining this Omega." She spat the word like it was a curse, a stain on the air. Every condescending syllable, every dismissive glance, was another needle piercing Cora's already wounded heart. "The elders are growing restless," the woman continued, her attention solely on Rhys. "You're running out of time. The pack needs a strong Luna at your side, Rhys, not a burden." A burden. That single poisonous word was the spark that ignited the raging inferno of Cora's pain and fury. She had been hunted. She had been lied to. She had been made to feel like a tool, a means to an end. But she would not be shamed. Not anymore. Something inside her, something she thought had died long ago, snapped. A burden? Cora's voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension in the room with the sharpness of a razor. Both Rhys and the redhead turned to look at her, surprised she had spoken. She stepped forward, out of the shadows, her chin held high. "You talk about strength," Cora said, her stormy eyes locked on the redhead's surprised green ones. "But all I hear is fear. You're afraid that your precious traditions are meaningless. You're afraid that a title means nothing next to a true bond. You're afraid that this," she gestured to herself, "this lowly Omega is more important to him than you could ever be." The redhead stared, stunned into a rare silence by Cora's audacity. Rhys looked at Cora, and in that moment, his entire expression shifted. The guilt, the desperation, it was all washed away by a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. He saw her. Not the frightened Omega from the cafe, but a fierce, defiant spirit who refused to be broken. Lyra's dismissiveness was the final catalyst. He had lied to protect Cora from this very world, from this very prejudice, and now it was standing in his living room trying to destroy her. He gently but firmly removed the redhead's hand from his arm. "You are right about one thing, Lyra," he said, his voice dangerously soft, a calm sea before a tsunami. "The pack does need a strong Luna." And then he let it go. The power that erupted from him was nothing like the quiet pressure from the cafe. It was a tidal wave, a raw, elemental force of pure alpha authority that slammed into the room. The air grew thick, heavy, vibrating with an ancient and terrible power. The floor-to-ceiling windows groaned in their frames. Lyra cried out, her arrogance shattering as she was forced to her knees, her head bowed in submission. Cora felt it too, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle her own legs. But it was different for her. Woven through the terrifying power was the gentle, unwavering hum of the mate bond, a silent, possessive shield that wrapped around her, whispering, "You are mine. You are safe." Rhys's eyes blazed with the light of 1,000 golden suns. His voice, when he spoke, was not the voice of a man. It was the sound of mountains breaking, of thunder rolling across the plains. "And her name," he thundered, his gaze locked on Cora, claiming her before the world, before his pack, before the goddess herself, "is Cora." The revelation of his true, terrifying power silenced everything, but it also opened a new, deeper chasm of fear in Cora's soul. She wasn't just mated to an alpha. She was mated to a king, a living force of nature, and she was completely, utterly, and terrifyingly out of her depth. Chapter 12. The Weight of a King. The oppressive weight of Rhys's power receded, but its ghost lingered in the air, a silent, crackling testament to what he was. Lyra scrambled to her feet, her beautiful face a twisted mask of humiliation and pure, unadulterated hatred. She shot one last venomous glare at Cora, a promise of retribution, before she turned and stormed out of the penthouse, the elevator doors sliding shut on her fury. The silence she left behind was heavy with unspoken words. Rhys turned to Cora. The terrifying power was gone, the golden light in his eyes fading back to a soft, human amber. He looked exposed, emotionally drained. The king had vanished, leaving only the man. A man burdened by the crown he wore. "Cora, he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry. For all of it. The lies. For letting her. For any of this." He finally told her everything, the words tumbling out of him in a raw, desperate torrent. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of his title, of a life where every friendship, every alliance, every interaction was filtered through the lens of his power. "No one has ever seen me," he confessed, and the pain in his voice was a physical thing, a wound that Cora could feel as if it were her own. "They see the alpha of alphas. They see the leader, the prophecy, a symbol. But you, that first night in the cafe, you looked at me and you didn't see any of that. You were just you, frightened and fierce and real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't a title. I was just a man. Your mate." He looked at her, his eyes shimmering with a vulnerability she never thought an alpha, let alone the alpha, could possess. "You are the only thing in my life that has ever felt truly mine." He explained the full, terrifying urgency of the prophecy. His 25th birthday was no longer a distant threat. It was weeks away. He admitted that his strength was already beginning to wane in small ways, little flickers of weakness he could still hide. He explained that if the mate bond wasn't fully completed by then, the consequences would be catastrophic. His death would create a power vacuum that would shatter the fragile peace between the packs, plunging their entire world into a bloody war. His life, the lives of his pack, the fate of their entire kind. It all rested on her, on them. As she listened, feeling the raw, undiluted truth of his words, something inside her shifted. The sharp, righteous anger that had sustained her began to dissolve, melting away under the heat of his confession. It was replaced by a deep, aching wave of empathy. He wasn't a tyrant who had lied to use her. He was a man, trapped by a destiny he never asked for, carrying a weight that would have crushed anyone else. He was terrified of dying, yes, but he was more terrified of dying alone, of never being truly seen. Her own fear and betrayal felt small in comparison to the mountain of responsibility he carried every single day. She closed the distance between them. The air was no longer charged with anger, but with a fragile, tentative understanding. She lifted her hand and gently, hesitantly, touched his face. Her fingers traced the tense, sharp line of his jaw, a silent offering of comfort, of forgiveness. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as he let out a shuddering breath. It was a surrender. a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that ran deeper than any lie, deeper than any prophecy. The passion and the desperation were still there, simmering just beneath the surface. But in that moment, as her hand rested on his cheek, something new was born between them. A connection forged not in the fire of the mate bond, but in the shared vulnerability of two souls who had finally, truly, seen each other. Chapter 13. A different kind of hunter. A fragile peace had settled in the penthouse, built on the rubble of Reese's lies and the raw truth of his confession. For the first time, Cora felt the tentative shoots of a real connection, something that existed beyond the prophecy and the mate bond. They were learning each other not as an alpha and an omega, but as two souls bound by a shared, impossible destiny. That night, sleep did not come easy. As she drifted in the gray space between waking and dreaming, a new presence slipped into her mind. It was not a violent intrusion, but a soft, persuasive whisper. A voice that was not Reese's. Cora. Her dream self stood in a field of ash, under a blood-red moon. A man walked towards her out of the swirling gray mist. He was handsome, his eyes the color of twilight, his face etched with a charismatic sorrow. His scent was of smoke and old earth. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a distant echo. "My name is Cale," he said, his voice a sad, beautiful melody. "I am not your enemy. I am your protector." He raised a hand, and the ashen landscape around them dissolved, replaced by a vivid, horrifying memory. She saw a forest, ancient and vibrant. She saw wolves with silver-tipped fur, omegas living in peace. Then she saw the invaders, hulking wolves, their pelts the color of night, led by an alpha with Reese's golden eyes. The Great Mountain Pack. It was a slaughter, a massacre. The memory ended with the forest burning, the silver pelts stained with blood. "This was my pack," Cale whispered, the pain of 1,000 generations in his voice. "This was Omega's end, your ancestors, and mine." He looked at her, his twilight eyes filled with a powerful, compelling sincerity. "Reese's pack doesn't want to honor your gift, Cora. They want to possess it. They want to use your harmony to strengthen their alpha's rule, to ground his fury. They are conquerors. They will cage you, just as they have caged their own people under a rigid hierarchy of power." He offered her a different path, a tempting vision of a world reborn. "Join me," he pleaded. "Help me build a new world, a world without alphas who command and omegas who submit. A world of equals, a world where we are all just wolves, free." The vision shattered, and Cora woke with a gasp, the scent of smoke still lingering in the air. Cale's words echoed in her mind, a seductive and dangerous poison. She found Reese standing on the balcony, looking out at the city as if it were a kingdom he was about to lose. She walked up behind him, her heart a tangled mess of confusion and fear. "Who is Cale?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "And what really happened at Omega's end?" Reese stiffened. He turned to face her, and the shame, the deep ancestral guilt on his face, was all the confirmation she needed. "He is the last descendant of the Silver Moon Pack," Reese said, his voice raw. "The alpha whose people my ancestors destroyed." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "The stories, the history I was taught, it was a lie. They saw the Omega's power of harmony as a threat to alpha rule, so they eradicated them. It is the greatest stain on my bloodline." He finally looked at her, his golden eyes swimming with a pain that was all his own. "My ancestors were monsters, Cora. They were wrong, but I swear to you I am not them. Don't let Cale's righteous vengeance burn down what little hope we have left. Help me build a better future, a future you deserve. Don't let him force us to repeat the mistakes of the past." The choice was hers. Believe in the tormented king trying to atone for the sins of his fathers, or join the charismatic rebel seeking to burn the old world and its sins to the ground? Chapter 14. the harmony and the fury. Cora made her choice. She chose the difficult, uncertain path of building something new over the seductive, simple path of destruction. She chose Rhys. They left the penthouse, the gilded cage, for a secluded estate nestled deep in the mountains, a place of stone and timber that felt more like a fortress. Here, surrounded by the ancient power of Rhys's packlands, her real training began. It was not about suppressing her power, but embracing it. "Don't hide your song anymore," Rhys told her, his voice a low rumble as they stood in a sun-dappled clearing. "Learn how to change its key." The training was unlike anything she could have imagined. It was an exercise in pure empathy, in deep spiritual connection. For her to master her gift of harmony, she first had to understand the discord she was meant to soothe. She had to understand him. He let her in. With a deep breath, he dropped the carefully constructed walls of the calm, controlled alpha and let her feel the raging storm beneath. She gasped, stumbling back as the full, untamed force of his wolf slammed into her senses. It was a terrifying tempest of possessiveness, of brutal, protective fury, of the crushing weight of 1,000 years of leadership. It was a power that could shatter mountains, and it was all aimed, a fierce and burning spear, at keeping her safe. "Don't fight it," he grunted, his own body tense with the effort of holding back. "Harmonize with it. Find my song beneath the storm, and sing with me." Terrified, she reached out with her own power, not to push back, but to connect. She focused on the man beneath the king, on the vulnerable soul beneath the raging wolf. She found the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart, the deep, unwavering note of his love for her, and she wrapped her own energy around it, her calming influence a gentle, silver light in his golden inferno. He let out a shuddering breath, the tension in his shoulders easing. The raging storm in his eyes softened to a warm, simmering heat. "You feel that?" he whispered in awe. "You're not dampening my power. You're focusing it. You make me stronger." Their training grew more intense, more intimate. They began to shift together. His wolf was a magnificent, terrifying creature, a beast of shadow and power with eyes of molten gold. Hers, when she finally let it emerge, was not the timid creature she'd imagined, but a sleek, graceful wolf of silver and moonlight, her stormy eyes burning with a fierce intelligence. They moved together through the forest, a dance of darkness and light. A hunt, a chase, a silent communion of two halves finally made whole. It was here, in their most primal forms, that their bond solidified into something unbreakable. The physical connection between them was no longer the desperate, hungry act of a new bond, but a slow, deep, and profound expression of a love that was reshaping their souls. One evening, as they lay tangled together in their human forms, skin to skin on a soft rug before a crackling fire, a sound drifted through the mountain air. It was a howl, distant but clear. It was not a call of greeting or a challenge. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. It wasn't one voice, but dozens, a chorus of pain and war. Rhys was on his feet in an instant, his body transforming into that of the Alpha King, his eyes blazing. The peace was shattered. Kale had made his move. Chapter 15. The first blood chaos was a tidal wave. Alarms, ancient and magical, shrieked through the mountain estate, a sound that vibrated in Cora's very bones. Rhys moved with a frightening, focused speed, pulling on clothes, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was no longer her mate, her trainer. He was the alpha of alphas, a king going to war. Cora felt the panic of his pack as if it were her own. Through her burgeoning empathic senses, she was connected to them all. 1,000 threads of terror, pain, and confusion that flooded her system and made her want to retch. They didn't wait for a car. They ran, their powerful werewolf bodies eating up the miles, the forest a green blur around them. They were heading towards the eastern border, towards a defensive outpost that guarded the pass into their territory. The smell hit them long before they arrived. The the acrid stench of magical fire and the coppery, sickening scent of spilled blood. The scene was one of utter devastation. The stone watchtower was a blackened, crumbling ruin. The barracks were ablaze, hungry orange flames licking at the night sky. The air was thick with smoke and the sounds of the wounded. Cora's heart seized. This was no longer a theoretical conflict, a battle of ideals. This was real. These were Reese's people, men and women she could feel, whose pain she could taste. And they were dying. She saw a figure being helped from the rubble, their face smudged with soot, their arm hanging limp and useless. It was Lyra. The fiery arrogance in her green eyes was gone, replaced by a stunned, haunted shock. Their eyes met for a brief second across the chaotic scene, and in that moment, Cora felt not triumph, but a shared, horrified understanding. Cale wasn't just fighting Reese. He was trying to tear their entire world apart. A warrior, his face grim and bloody, ran to Reese. "Alpha," he gasped, bowing his head. It was Cale. He led them himself. They were brutal, unstoppable. They tore through our defenses like they were nothing. Casualties? Reese's voice was stone. 12 dead, the warrior said, his voice thick with grief. Twice that wounded. We were completely overwhelmed. He paused, swallowing hard. He left a message, Alpha, for the Omega. Every head turned to Cora. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of fear, blame, and a desperate, flickering hope. He spoke to the last one standing before they vanished. The warrior continued, his gaze fixed on Reese. He said, "This is only a taste. Tell your king to give me the lost line Omega. Let her choose her own path. Let her choose freedom." Then he said, the warrior's voice dropped to a terrified whisper, "Or the next time I will not stop until I have burned his mountain to the ground and salted the earth with the ashes of his people." The threat hung in the blood-soaked air, absolute and undeniable. This was no longer just about Cora's choice or Reese's life. It was about the survival of everyone here. The point of no return had been crossed. They were at war. Cora looked from the burning buildings to the wounded being carried away, to the haunted look in Lyra's eyes, and finally, to the grim, resolute set of Reese's jaw. A silent understanding, as solid and as real as the mountain beneath their feet, passed between them. She was not a prize to be won. She was not a prophecy to be fulfilled. She was a warrior in this fight, and her power of harmony was the only thing that stood between this pack and utter annihilation. Chapter 16. Whispers of War. The mountain estate had become a house of ghosts. Wounded warriors walked the halls like shadows, their pain a constant, low hum that vibrated in Cora's bones. She did what she could, moving among them, offering what little comfort her fledgling power could provide. She would touch a fevered brow, and the pain would ease. She would sit with a wolf haunted by the horrors of the attack, and their trembling would still. But it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. For every flicker of peace she created, a tidal wave of fear and grief remained. The real blow came not with the howl of a wolf, but with the silent arrival of a message. An emergency council of the Allied Alphas had been called. Reese was summoned to the Great Hall, to the Chamber of Magical Communication. The summons was cold, its language laced with a veiled threat concerning inter-pack security. Cora stood by his side as the air in the center of the room shimmered, resolving into the stern, holographic images of 5 of the most powerful alphas on the continent. Their faces were grim, their eyes hard as stone. The accusation was immediate, delivered by a grizzled alpha named Marcus. "We have received disturbing news, Reese. News of a prophecy, your prophecy, and of a rogue Omega you are harboring." Lyra's betrayal. The words were a venomous dart, striking home with cruel precision. She hadn't just fled. She had set the world on fire behind her. "An Omega of such unpredictable power is a liability," another alpha, a sharp-faced female named Selena, declared. "Your pack's ancient, private curse now threatens to destabilize us all." Kale uses your weakness as a catalyst for his war." The others murmured in agreement. They didn't see Cora as a solution. They saw her as the problem, a freak of nature, a bomb waiting to detonate. The old, hateful prejudice, the belief that Omegas were inherently weak and that a powerful one was an unnatural threat, was being used as a weapon against them. Then came the demand, cold and absolute. "Hand her over, Reese," Marcus commanded. "The council will take her into protective custody. We will contain the situation until Kale is dealt with." Contain her, like a plague, like a rabid animal. The words were a physical blow, and Cora flinched as if struck. Reese stepped forward, his body a solid, unbreachable wall in front of her. His voice, when he spoke, was not the roar of a king, but the chilling, quiet deadliness of a gathering storm. "No." The single word vibrated with absolute authority. "She is not a liability," he continued, his golden eyes sweeping over the assembled alphas, pinning each of them with his gaze. "She is my mate. She is the Luna of the great mountain pack, and she is the only hope our kind has for a future free from the endless cycle of violence that has plagued us for centuries." His declaration was magnificent, a defiant roar against the dying of the light. But it fell on deaf ears. The alphas saw only the desperate plea of a dying man, a king willing to sacrifice the world for the sake of a tainted bond. "You are compromised, Reese," Selena said, her voice laced with pity. "The prophecy has made you weak." The ultimatum was delivered. "Contain the Omega yourself and renounce this bond, or you will face a war on two fronts. We will not allow your sentiment to drag our packs into ruin." The projections vanished, leaving Reese and Cora alone in the echoing silence. His authority, once absolute, was now challenged, and Cora's deepest, most terrifying fear had just been confirmed. To the rest of the world, she was, and always would be, a curse. Chapter 17. The Fading Light. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. The ultimatum from the council hung over the estate like a death shroud, isolating them, strangling their hope. Reese's 25th birthday, once a distant date on a calendar, was now a looming executioner, its shadow stretching longer with each passing hour. The prophecy's curse was no longer a secret, abstract threat. Cora could feel it in him. It was a slow, insidious decay, a light dimming from within. She felt it through the mate bond, a growing coldness where once there had been a blazing inferno. He tried to hide it, pushing himself harder in the war room, his voice still a powerful command. But she saw the truth. She saw the faint, almost unnoticeable tremor in his hand as he held a pen. She saw him stumble once, catching himself against a table with a sharp intake of breath, his face momentarily pale before he straightened up and pretended nothing had happened. The ticking clock was no longer a distant sound. It was the frantic, weakening beat of his own heart. Then, Kale struck again. He didn't hit a border outpost this time. He hit them at home. Exploiting the political chaos Lyra had sown, the distrust that now separated the Great Mountain Pack from its allies, he slipped past their defenses and fell upon a village nestled in the heart of their valley. A place of families, of elders and children. The reports that came back were horrifying. This attack was different. Kyle's power had grown, twisted into something darker. The survivors, weeping and incoherent, spoke of a strange madness that had descended upon them. They spoke of a suffocating wave of pure discord, a foul energy that turned friend against friend, brother against brother, in a blind, unthinking rage. Kyle hadn't just destroyed the village. He had made it destroy itself. His power was a corruption, a plague of the soul, the perfect and horrifying opposite of Cora's harmony. Reese and Cora arrived to a scene of quiet devastation. The fighting was over, but the emotional carnage was absolute. The sight of his people, broken and weeping, combined with the relentless drain of his own life force, was too much. Reese staggered, a hand flying to his chest. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. the strength that had held him up for so long, the sheer force of will of the alpha of alphas, finally crumbled. He collapsed to his knees, his body trembling uncontrollably, his golden eyes clouded with a profound, soul-deep agony. "Reese!" Cora's scream was a raw, tearing sound. She rushed to him, falling to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his shaking form, unsure how to help, how to stop this. She cradled his head in her lap, feeling the life force, the brilliant, blazing light of him, ebbing away through their bond like sand through her fingers. As she held him, her heart shattering into a million pieces, a voice spoke in her mind. It was not Kale's seductive whisper. This voice was ancient, vast, and as cold and clear as the light of the moon itself. It was a voice of immense, impersonal power. The moon goddess. Harmony or destruction, the voice echoed, not with words, but with pure meaning. The choice is yours, lost line. The weight of a world, the fate of a king, the choice between saving everything or losing it all, settled upon her shoulders, and she had never felt so small. In Chapter 18, The Darkest Moon, Reese's grand chamber, once a place of power and warmth, had become a tomb. He lay on the massive bed, unnervingly still, his breathing a shallow, barely perceptible whisper. The pack's healers had come and gone, their faces grim, their skills useless against a curse woven from magic and time itself. Outside these stone walls, his pack was rudderless, their enemies gathered like vultures, and the world was falling apart. Cora sat in a chair beside the bed, her hand clutching his. His skin was cool to the touch. The blazing warmth she had come to associate with him, the very fire of his soul, was almost gone. This was her fault. All of it. The thought was a cold, hard stone in her gut. Kale attacked because of her. The other alphas had turned on Reese because of her. And now Reese. He was dying because of her. Because he had found her. Because he had chosen her. Her entire life she had believed she was a burden, a curse, a beacon for disaster. And now, the universe had provided the ultimate, tragic proof. Her power of harmony was a bitter, cruel joke. What good was a song of peace in a world burning down around her? What good was it if she couldn't save the one person whose life was more important than her own? The dark, insidious flaw of her own nature, the belief that her only worth lay in sacrifice, rose up and consumed her. She would do anything to stop this. Anything. Kale's offer slithered into her thoughts. His vision of a new world, free from the hierarchies that had caused so much pain. Was he right? If she went to him, if she gave him the power he so desperately craved, would he stop the war? Would he spare Reese's people? Could she sacrifice herself to save them all? Or maybe there was another way. If she left, if she ran, so far and so fast that not even the moon could find her. Would the prophecy's curse break? Would the bond sever? Would he live if she agreed to a life without him? She would gladly sacrifice her own happiness. She would wander as a ghost for the rest of her days, if it meant he would open his eyes again. She was drowning in impossible choices, each one leading to a different kind of heartbreak. She looked at his pale, still face, the face of the man who had shown her she was more than a curse, only for her to become the very thing that was killing him. The love she felt for him, a brilliant, vibrant thing that had just begun to bloom, now felt like a poison. Her very existence was the knife twisting in his heart. Tears she didn't know she had left to cry tracked silently down her cheeks. The weight of the goddess's choice, harmony or destruction, was too much to bear. She had brought nothing but destruction. She leaned over him, the silence in the room a suffocating roar. Her tears fell onto his cheek, a final, sad offering. She pressed her lips to his forehead, a ghost of a kiss. "I'll save you," she whispered into the terrible quiet, the words a vow, a prayer, a death sentence. "I promise, no matter what it costs me." Even if the cost was him. Chapter 19. Echoes of Silver Despair was a cold, dark ocean, and Cora was drowning in it. She clutched Rhys's hand, his life force a faint, flickering ember against the encroaching darkness. The goddess's words, harmony or destruction, were an impossible riddle, a cruel joke. She had brought nothing but destruction. In a final, desperate act of love, she pushed her own energy into him, not to heal him, not to fight the curse, but simply to connect. A plea, a whisper into the void. Don't leave me. And in the depths of that connection, something answered. Her mind was pulled away, tumbling through time, into a memory that was not her own. She stood in an ancient forest, bathed in the pure silver light of an untainted moon. She saw wolves with coats of shimmering silver, omegas, her ancestors. But they were not the timid, submissive creatures of lore. They stood proudly beside their alphas, not behind them. She watched as a massive alpha, his fur the color of a starless night, roared with primal fury, his power a destructive, uncontrolled inferno. But the silver omega at his side did not flinch. She did not try to smother his rage. Instead, she reached out with her own energy, a calm, luminous song. She didn't silence his power. She shaped it. The alpha's raw, chaotic fury was focused, transformed from a wildfire into a brilliant, concentrated beam of protective light. The alpha was the power. The omega was the purpose. The vision shifted. She saw another tribe, wolves with fur like twilight and smoke. Kale's ancestors. Their power was a different song, not of soothing harmony, but of fierce, unbreakable unity, a bond forged of will and independence. And she saw Kale, a distant echo of his ancestors, twisting that beautiful song of unity into a shriek of domination. He wasn't creating a world of equals. He was using a twisted, corrupted version of their power to force everyone to sing his song of rage and pain. Understanding crashed over her with the force of a physical blow. Her power. It wasn't a weakness. It wasn't a sedative for an alpha's strength. It was the lens, the conductor, the artist's hand that could take the raw, chaotic paint of an alpha's power and create a masterpiece of focused, controlled energy. She wasn't a burden to be protected. She was the balance that made their entire world possible. She gasped, her eyes flying open. She was back in the dim, quiet chamber, Rhys's hand still in hers. The despair, the crushing weight of her own guilt, was gone. In its place, a fierce, blazing clarity burned away all her fear. Her self-sacrificing flaw, the instinct to run or to surrender, had been forged in the fire of this revelation into something new, selfless, unshakable leadership. She knew what she had to do. She would not run. She would not surrender herself. She would fight, not with tooth and claw, but with the full, untamed power of her song. She leaned close to Rhys's still form, her touch no longer desperate but infused with a new and potent strength. "Wake up, my love," she whispered, her voice not a plea, but a gentle, resonant command that vibrated with the ancient power she now understood. "We have a war to win." Through their bond, a flicker of warmth, faint but undeniable, answered her. Hope. Chapter 20. The Luna's Song. Cora walked into the war room, and the senior warriors of the Great Mountain Pack fell silent. They saw the same woman who had been weeping at their alpha's bedside only hours before, but something was different. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a fire that burned with the cold, clear light of the moon. "Call the council," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with an authority that no one dared to question. "All of them, now." Minutes later, the holographic forms of the allied alphas shimmered into existence, their faces hard and impatient. Before Marcus, the grizzled leader, could speak, Cora stepped into the center of the room. She didn't argue, she didn't demand, she connected. Reaching out with her newly understood power, she sent a single, gentle thread of pure harmony through the magical connection that linked their chambers. It was not a demand for attention, but an offering of peace, a silent plea to listen not with their ears, but with their souls. The alphas shifted, their hard expressions softening with surprise and confusion. "Kyle is not winning this war with strength," she began, her voice resonating with a calm, unshakable truth. "He is winning with chaos. He is infecting our packs with a plague of discord, turning our own strength against us. You cannot fight a fire like that with more fire. You will only feed the flames." She explained what she had seen in her vision. The truth of the Omegas, the truth of Kale's corrupted power. "My power, the power of the lost line. It is not a weakness. It is the only true weapon we have against him. It is the only thing that can turn his song of discord back into a song of harmony." A figure stepped forward from the shadows of the room. It was Lyra. Her arm was in a sling, but her back was straight. "She is right," Lyra said, her voice clear and strong. She had seen Kale's power firsthand, felt its sickening, divisive influence on her own warriors. She had witnessed true leadership, not in a display of dominance, but in this Omega's quiet, unbreakable strength. "What Kale spreads is a sickness. The Luna, she is the cure." Lyra turned to the stunned alphas. "My pack will follow her." Just as the alphas began to process this shocking turn of events, the doors to the chamber opened. Rhys entered, leaning heavily on a guard, his body still weak, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, unwavering pride as he looked at Cora. "Listen to her," Rhys said, his voice raspy but firm, leaving no room for argument. "She is our future." His faith in her, his absolute and unconditional support, was the final blow to their resistance. The council, swayed by Cora's impossible calm, Lyra's unexpected testimony, and the sheer force of their dying alpha's belief, finally, hesitantly agreed. A fragile, desperate alliance was forged. They would gather their warriors. They would march on the blighted heart of the valley, where Kale had made his stronghold, and they would follow the song of the Omega. Chapter 21. The Storm's Quiet Heart. The night before the battle, the air was thick with the smell of steel, sweat, and fear. A sprawling war camp had risen at the edge of the valley, a sea of flickering torchlight, and the tense, murmuring voices of 1,000 warriors. Banners that had once flown on opposing sides now snapped in the wind together, a fragile tapestry of unity against a common, creeping darkness. In the quiet heart of the storm, in the command tent, Cora and Rhys found a moment of peace. He was still pale, still leaning heavily on the curse that was slowly killing him, but her constant, gentle harmony was a balm to his spirit, a lifeline that kept the darkness at bay. The impending dawn had stripped away everything non-essential, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their bond. He reached out, his hand coming to rest on her cheek, his touch both a question and a prayer. "I saw you," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion too deep for words. "Even when I was gone, drifting in the dark. I saw your light. You pulled me back." He looked at her, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You are not a curse, Cora. You are a miracle." All the pain, all the lies, all the fear that had stood between them dissolved in the profound, simple truth of that moment. He saw her, truly saw her, and she saw him, not a king, not a prophecy, but her mate, her other half. She leaned into his touch, her own heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like it might tear her apart. "And you," she whispered, her voice thick, "are a king worth fighting for." The air between them grew heavy, charged with the deep, desperate need of two souls on the brink of a battle that could be their last. This was not the wild, hungry passion of their first days, but something deeper, more profound. It was a tender, savage affirmation of life in the face of death, a silent promise that no matter what the dawn brought, they would face it together. Their kiss was a slow, burning declaration, a sacred vow sealed in the shadows of the war tent. It was a moment of pure, undiluted love, a final steamy communion before the storm broke. Later, They stood at the entrance of the tent, side by side, the Alpha and the Luna. He was the sword, tempered and sharp, and she was the harmony that would guide its strike. They looked out over the valley. In the distance, Kyle's corrupting influence was a visible, sickly purple shimmer in the air, a wound on the land itself. Their army was ready. Their hearts were one. Cora was no longer running, no longer just surviving. She was leading. She had embraced her power, embraced her destiny, and now she would use it to protect them all. Chapter 22. The Unbroken Song. The battle began with a scream. Not a sound, but a psychic shriek of pure chaos that erupted from the heart of the valley. Kale's power washed over the allied army, a sickly purple wave of discord. Cora felt it slam into their ranks, turning bravery into mindless rage, turning ally against ally. The charge faltered, warriors snarling at the shadows, at their own packmates, their strength becoming a weapon against themselves. Reese was a golden inferno in the heart of the madness. Still weakened by the prophecy's curse, he fought with the heart of a king, his presence a small, defiant island of order in a sea of chaos. But Cora could feel him fading, his light sputtering against the overwhelming tide of Kale's corruption. She was the eye of the storm. Standing at the center of their formation, she closed her eyes and began to sing. Not with her voice, but with her soul. She sent her power of harmony out in a shimmering silver counterwave, a melody of peace against his song of rage. It was a shield, a balm. It couldn't stop Kale's power completely, but it protected the minds of her warriors, reminding them who the true enemy was. Kale felt it. He felt her. With a roar that shook the very stones of the valley, he broke through the front lines. He moved like a nightmare, a blur of shadow and fury, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. Reese met his charge, a clash of gold and twilight, but the fight was brutally short. Weakened and exhausted, Reese was thrown aside like a broken doll. And then Kale stood before her. His eyes burned with a mad, triumphant light. "Your song ends now, little Omega," he snarled, his hand reaching for her, intending to drain her, to consume her, to silence her forever. This was the moment, the culmination of everything. Cora did not scream. She did not cower. She opened her eyes, and they shone with the pure, unwavering light of the moon. And she unleashed everything. It was not an attack. It was a release. A silent, breathtaking explosion of pure, silver light that erupted from her soul. It was not hot or destructive. It was warm. It was calm. It was overwhelmingly, impossibly peaceful. The light washed over the battlefield, and the rage, the fear, the chaos. It all simply dissolved. The warring wolves stopped, their heads cocked as if waking from a long and terrible dream. The light enveloped Kale. It did not burn him. It did not tear him apart. It held him. It moved past the rage, past the corruption, and touched the ancient, wounded heart of his pain. It showed him the memory of his ancestors, not as victims, but as proud wolves of unity. It offered him not destruction, not subjugation, but the one thing he had never known: balance. He screamed, a sound of pure agony as the foul, purple corruption was burned away by the clean, silver light, leaving only the broken, weeping man beneath. In that same instant, as Cora's song reached its crescendo, the curse on Reese shattered. The prophecy was fulfilled. His strength, his power, his very life force surged back into him, stronger and purer than it had ever been before. He rose to his feet, his golden eyes clear and blazing. He and Cora stood together, their power intertwined, a perfect, unbreakable harmony of fury and peace. Kyle, now just a man, stripped of his stolen power, collapsed at their feet. The battle was over. The song had won. Chapter 23. The Dawn. After the silver light faded, leaving the valley in a state of profound, holy silence. As if on cue, the first rays of dawn crested the mountain peaks, chasing away the last lingering shadows of Kale's corruption. The war was over. Rhys turned to Cora, his movement a blur. He was no longer the fading king, but a god of sunlight and power. He pulled her into his arms, a fierce, crushing embrace that was a prayer of gratitude, a roar of triumph, a vow of eternal love. "My Luna," he breathed into her hair, the words a sacred brand upon her soul. Their bond, now complete and unbroken, pulsed between them, a radiant, tangible thing that every wolf on the field could feel as a promise of a new age. The allied alphas, Marcus, Selena, and the others who had once condemned her, approached slowly. Their faces were etched not with pride, but with a deep and humbling awe. They had not just seen a battle won, they had witnessed a miracle. They stopped before Cora, and one by one, they lowered their heads. Not in submission to an alpha, but in reverence to the Luna who had saved them all. "Luna," Marcus said, his gruff voice thick with an emotion she never thought to hear from him. "Forgive us." From the crowd of warriors, Lyra emerged. The arrogant fire in her eyes had been replaced by a clear, steady light of respect. She stopped before Cora, her posture no longer proud but strong in its humility. "I was wrong," Lyra said, her voice clear and sincere for all to hear. "I measured strength in dominance and power in fury. You have shown us all what true strength is. It is the grace to heal, not just the will to break." She looked Cora in the eye. "My pack and my life are loyal to you." The work of mending began. As the healers tended to the physical wounds, Cora moved among the weary warriors. She laid her hands on their shoulders, and the last vestiges of Kale's psychic poison dissolved. She spoke soft words, and the terror of the battle faded from their eyes. She was no longer just Rhys's mate. She was their Luna, the heart of their new, united people, and for the first time in her life, surrounded by the wolves she had once feared, she was finally, truly home. Chapter 24. A world remade months later, the world was reborn. The scars on the valley floor had faded, covered now by a blanket of new green growth. The air itself felt cleaner, lighter, free from the weight of ancient hatreds. In the great hall of the mountain estate, a new kind of council was in session. Alphas sat beside betas, and betas sat beside omegas. Voices that had been silenced for generations were now heard, their wisdom valued, their perspectives sought. The rigid, brutal hierarchy of the past had crumbled, replaced by a system of balance, of cooperation, of harmony. Guided by Cora's grace and Rhys's strength, a new era had begun. Rhys was a different kind of king. The crushing weight of the prophecy was gone, and with it the lonely arrogance of absolute power. He led not as a solitary ruler, but as a true partner, his eyes constantly seeking Cora's, his decisions tempered by her wisdom, their leadership a seamless, instinctive dance. That night, they stood on the balcony of their private chambers, the full moon hanging like a silver lantern in the ink-black sky. The world they had fought for, the world they had almost died for, lay peaceful and thriving below them. Rhys came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble against her ear. "What you've built." "What we've built," she corrected softly, leaning her head back against his shoulder. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I spent my whole life fearing a destiny that was written for me," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so afraid it would take everything from me. I never imagined it would give me everything I ever truly wanted." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. The love that shone in his golden eyes was a reflection of the love in her own heart, a love that had been forged in fear, tested by lies, and tempered in the fires of war. It was a love that had not just saved them, but had remade their world. "Our destiny was never written in a prophecy, Rhys," she whispered. "It was written right here." She pressed a hand to his heart. "In us." Their kiss was not the desperate clash of their beginning, nor the passionate affirmation before the battle. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise of 1,000 peaceful dawns to come, of a lifetime of shared laughter and quiet moments. It was the soft, unbreakable song of two souls who had found their perfect, eternal harmony. Hand in hand, they stood under the watchful eye of the moon, the Alpha and the Luna, their love the foundation of a new world.